Thank you, Acting President, and I too would like to speak briefly on Mr Barton's motion, which I think is a very sensible one and which I'm very pleased incorporates much of my region of Northern Metropolitan. The extension of the free tram system around the universities, and it's effectively a sort of a 6 kilometres of track that will be added to it, and which is about which affects 13 different tram routes. And the overarching goal, which I think is a very good one, is to improve the access to universities, hospitals, sporting precincts, and of course the city. I would probably like to add during the inquiry whether the committee would look at the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre as well, because as we see, and as Mr Davis pointed out, by putting free transport into places like Docklands, you really can invigorate an area, and I think this is one of the very effective ways of using our public transport to, and this, offsets some of the costs that Ms Taylor pointed out, because it brings more commerciality to those areas. It means people are spending more in the areas. Small businesses are benefiting from that. The Student Union at Melbourne University has been campaigning for some time to extend the free tram zone up to Melbourne University. And as someone who catches the tram down Swanston Street most weeks, I can see this makes an awful lot of sense. And we're not the only city to do this. As Mr Barton mentioned, Tallinn in Estonia has done this, and I just noted Luxembourg, and I think Ms Taylor mentioned Luxembourg is also going down this path of making it free completely. And where they think, now where there may be a cost, and if we use the example of the costings that Mr Barton has had, preliminary costings of $4 to $5 million in lost revenue, that would be equally offset by things like the cost of managing the fares. And I don't know how much Mikey costs, but I'm pretty sure that I'm pretty sure that the fares that we collect barely cover the cost of collecting them. And I think this would be something I'd be very interested to hear from the committee. How much does it cost to collect the fares we're collecting? And could we use that money better? And does extending free tram zones, not just in these areas, but maybe even more broadly, really actually invigorate the local economy and therefore actually improve things? And just very quickly, when we looked into this, and I commend the Committee of Melbourne for the work that they have done in this area and some of the costings that they have done, and they have really considered this. And certainly I think the NGV, the National Gallery of Victoria, says that this would bring probably close to 75,000 new visitors to the gallery, which is significant. We know that our tourists love our trams, they love the free trams, but they do get confused that they're catching the tram and all of a sudden they get to the Yarra and they realise that now they have to pay to get to the Arts Centre or get to the National Gallery. And the same goes for going down to the MCG or going to the university or even going to St Vincent's Hospital. So we're not talking about a large area, but we are talking about an area that would have a significant effect. But what it also does is in France, for example, they found that passenger aggression was greatly reduced. They found there was an incredible decrease in antisocial behaviour because 90% of aggression on trams was due to fares. Operators were able to achieve faster boarding times. Now, I think I take Mr Davis's point that Mikey touch on, touch off does enable us to collect a lot of data about the usage of our tram system. So looking at alternatives on how we might collect that data if people aren't using their Mikeys is something I'd be interested in the committee considering. But when, as I've said before, when customers can get around with greater ease, this makes it a lot better for our small businesses around our city. But it also makes the city more accessible and fairer for our low-income earners, especially students. For people who are suffering social isolation, and this is something that's very close to my heart, this does enable people to get out and about more easily. And anything that we can do to do that is an improvement. And I think certainly for people with disabilities as well, enabling a much simpler way of using our public transport is very sensible. So I commend this. I do. I suppose quite often because I have an inner city electorate, and I know the acting president would agree with me that quite often we talk about wonderful transport and free transport in our inner city, and then I talk to my constituents in Epping or my constituents out in Meadow Parks or Broadmeadows, and they say, well, we would just like a bus that went somewhere near our house a couple of times a day. So while I think this is a very important and very good motion, and I'm very pleased to support it, I am constantly conscious that while we talk up inner city, we have to be very conscious of the disadvantage that our outer suburban and our sprawling outer suburbs are experiencing, and obviously our regional and rural areas also have these issues. So I'd like to commend the motion.